The evening had started like any other at Bellini's restaurant. The soft glow of pendant lights hung over white tablecloths, and the murmur of conversation blended with the gentle clink of silverware against plates. In the corner of the dining room stood a gleaming black baby grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm lights above. Amelia wiped her hands on her black apron and tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. She had been working at Bellini's for nearly 3 years now, balancing double shifts with her nursing classes at the local community college. The restaurant job wasn't glamorous, but the tips were good, and Mr. Bellini was understanding when she needed time off for exams. "Table 7 needs their check, and 9 just got seated," called Raj, the host, as he walked past with menus tucked under his arm. "Got it," Amelia replied, quickly gathering empty wine glasses from a recently vacated table. Tuesday nights were usually slow, but tonight was unusually busy. A local business convention had brought visitors to town, and many had chosen Bellini's for its reputation for excellent Italian cuisine. The kitchen was buzzing with activity, and the waitstaff moved efficiently between tables, everyone falling into the familiar rhythm they'd perfected over countless shifts together. Amelia approached table 9 with a warm smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Bellini's. My name is Amelia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The couple glanced up from their menus, both returning her smile. The woman, dressed in a navy business suit, asked about the wine list while her partner inquired about the evening's specials. Amelia answered their questions with practiced ease, jotting down their drink orders before heading to the bar. As she waited for the bartender to prepare the drinks, Amelia glanced at the piano in the corner. Usually on Friday and Saturday evenings, a pianist named Thomas would come in to play soft jazz and classical pieces that added to the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. But Thomas only played on weekends, and on weeknights the piano sat silent, more of a decorative piece than an instrument. "Order up," called Hector from the kitchen window. Amelia quickly collected the appetizers for table 4 and delivered them with a flourish. "The bruschetta is exceptional tonight," she said, setting down the plate. Hector used tomatoes from his own garden. The diners nodded appreciatively, already reaching for the aromatic appetizer. Amelia loved this part of her job, seeing people enjoy their food, watching as the first bite brought that look of pleasant surprise to their faces. Food brought people together, and even after 3 years, she still found joy in being part of that experience. The hours ticked by, and Amelia moved from table to table, refilling water glasses, bringing out steaming plates of pasta, and checking that everyone had everything they needed. Her feet ached in her sensible black shoes, but she kept her smile in place. Just 5 more hours, and then she could go home to her small apartment, soak her feet, and review her notes for tomorrow's anatomy class. "Hey, you doing okay?" asked Tina, another waitress, as they both stood at the service station folding napkins. Tina was in her 50s with laugh lines around her eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that Amelia had come to appreciate. "I'm fine. Just thinking about the exam I have on Thursday," Amelia replied, stifling a yawn. "Honey, I don't know how you do it." Tina shook her head admiringly, working these long shifts and still keeping up with school. "When do you sleep?" Amelia laughed. "Sleep? What's that?" The truth was, she did sometimes wonder if it was all worth it. At 28, she was older than most of her classmates in the nursing program. After high school, she'd drifted for a few years, unsure of what she wanted to do with her life. It wasn't until she'd helped care for her grandmother after a fall that she discovered her calling in healthcare. Now she was determined to finish her degree, no matter how many double shifts it took. "Table 12 needs more bread," Raj called as he passed by again. "On it," Amelia responded, already reaching for the bread basket. At the far end of the restaurant, an elderly man sat alone at a small table near the piano. Amelia had noticed him when he first came in. There was something dignified about his posture, the careful way he unfolded his napkin and studied the menu. She'd served him a bowl of minestrone soup and a glass of red wine, which he'd been nursing for the past hour while reading a book he'd brought with him. As Amelia approached with fresh bread, she noticed the title, "The Therapeutic Value of Music in Healthcare Settings." Her interest piqued. She couldn't help commenting as she set down the basket. "That looks interesting," she said, nodding toward the book. "I'm studying nursing, and we just had a lecture on alternative therapy approaches." The man looked up, his eyes brightening. "Ah, a future healthcare professional. Yes, music therapy is a fascinating field. I've spent most of my life exploring the connections between music and healing. Something about his voice, gentle yet passionate, made Amelia want to continue the conversation. But a commotion near the kitchen pulled her attention away. Mr. Bellini, the owner, was on his phone, his free hand gesturing animatedly, his face creased with concern. I understand, but we have a full house tonight. Yes, of course, health comes first. Feel better, Thomas. Mr. Bellini hung up and ran a hand through his thinning hair. When he noticed Amelia watching, he beckoned her over. Thomas has the flu, he said, referring to the weekend pianist. He was supposed to come in tonight as a special midweek performance for the convention guests. The business group specifically requested music during their dinner. Amelia glanced toward a long table in the center of the restaurant where about a dozen men and women in business attire were enjoying their meals. Can't we just play some recorded music? She suggested. Mr. Bellini shook his head. The sound system is acting up again. Besides, I promised them live piano music. It's what sets us apart from the chain restaurants. He looked so distressed that Amelia felt a twinge of sympathy. Mr. Bellini had built this restaurant from nothing, pouring his heart and soul into creating a place that offered not just food, but an experience. What about Joey from the kitchen? Doesn't he play guitar? She offered. Guitar isn't the same as piano, Mr. Bellini sighed, and the business group specifically mentioned looking forward to the piano. The convention organizer said several of their members are music enthusiasts. As if on cue, one of the men from the business group approached. Excuse me, I was wondering when the pianist might start playing. We were told there would be live music tonight. Mr. Bellini straightened his tie and forced a smile. I apologize, sir. Our regular pianist has taken ill. I'm trying to find a replacement as we speak. The man's disappointment was evident. That's a shame. We were looking forward to it. My colleague over there is an amateur pianist himself and was particularly excited. After the man returned to his table, Mr. Bellini turned to Amelia with a look of desperation. I don't suppose you play? Amelia's heart skipped a beat. A long-buried memory surfaced, her hands on piano keys, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers. She hadn't touched a piano in 15 years, not since... I took lessons as a kid, she admitted reluctantly. But it's been ages. Mr. Bellini's eyes lit up. Really? Could you play just a little something? Anything would be better than nothing. Just to say we provided what was promised. Amelia shook her head quickly. I don't think that's a good idea. I probably don't remember anything, and besides, I'm needed here on the floor. Tina and Raj can cover your tables for a few minutes. Mr. Bellini pressed. Just one or two simple songs. Please, Amelia, you'd be saving me. The desperation in his voice was hard to ignore. Mr. Bellini had always been good to her, accommodating her school schedule, giving her extra shifts when she needed the money for textbooks, and even sending her home with leftover food on tight weeks. I really don't, she began, but her protest died on her lips as she caught sight of the elderly man with the music therapy book. He was looking at the empty piano with such longing that something stirred inside her. When was the last time she had allowed herself to think about music? About the joy it had once brought her? Before the disastrous recital, before she'd locked that part of herself away? Amelia? Mr. Bellini's voice brought her back to the present. Just one song. That's all I'm asking. She took a deep breath, feeling a curious mix of terror and something else, something that felt strangely like longing. Let me finish with table 9 first, she said finally, hardly believing the words coming out of her own mouth. As she walked away to deliver dessert menus to her waiting customers, Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. What had she just agreed to? After all these years of avoiding pianos, of crossing to the other side of the street when passing music stores, of changing the radio station when certain pieces came on, was she really going to sit down at that gleaming baby grand and play? Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the menus on table 9. Across the restaurant, the elderly man turned a page in his book, unaware that his presence had somehow tipped the scales in Mr. Bellini's favor. Unaware that in just a few minutes, the silent piano in the corner would come to life under the hands of a waitress who had once been something much more. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she cleared the dessert plates from table 5. She kept glancing at the piano in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lights like a dark mirror. Had she really agreed to play? After all these years? You okay? Tina asked, noticing Amelia's distraction. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, she had. The ghost of a girl who once lived and breathed music, who fell asleep with melodies dancing in her head, who saw the world as an endless symphony. That girl had disappeared a long time ago, buried under years of self-doubt and painful memories. Mr. Bellini asked me to play the piano, Amelia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The regular pianist is sick and there's this business group that was promised music. Tina's eyes widened. You play piano? In all the time we've worked together, you never mentioned that. I don't play. I mean, I did, but I don't anymore. It's been 15 years. Amelia stacked the plates with more force than necessary, nearly chipping one against the edge of the table. 15 years is a long time, Tina agreed, studying Amelia's face. But they say it's like riding a bike. Once your fingers know the keys, they never really forget. Amelia shook her head. It's not that simple. She didn't know how to explain the complicated relationship she had with music. How could she tell Tina about the recital when she was 13? About the frozen panic? The missed notes that had seemed like the end of the world? About her teacher's disappointment and her parents' embarrassed faces in the audience? Mr. Bellini just needs someone to play a few simple tunes, Tina continued, oblivious to Amelia's inner turmoil. Nothing fancy, just enough to say there was live music. The business group's table erupted in laughter, drawing Amelia's attention. They seemed to be enjoying their evening, wine glasses glinting in the light as they toasted something. Would they even care about the music? Or would they scrutinize every note, every mistake? I should get back to my tables, Amelia said, turning away. But as she moved through the restaurant, she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the elderly man sitting alone near the piano. He had finished his soup and was now enjoying a small plate of tiramisu, still engrossed in his book. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was the way he held himself, with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent hours on a piano bench. "Refill on your wine, sir?" she asked, approaching his table with a bottle of the house red. He looked up with a gentle smile. "No, thank you. I'm savoring this glass. When you reach my age, you learn to make the good things last." Amelia nodded, about to move on, when he added, "I couldn't help overhearing. You play the piano?" Heat rose to her cheeks. Had her conversation with Tina been that loud? "I used to, a long time ago." The man's eyes, a clear blue-gray behind wire-rimmed glasses, seemed to look right through her. Music is a curious thing. It embeds itself in our muscles, in our very bones. I've worked with stroke patients who couldn't speak, but could still play songs they learned in childhood. Amelia found herself lingering at his table. "You're a doctor?" "A retired music professor, but I've spent the last 20 years studying music therapy," he explained, touching the cover of his book. "I've seen remarkable things. Music reaches parts of us that nothing else can." There was a warmth in his voice, an absence of judgment that made Amelia want to confide in him. "I haven't played since I was 13, she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember anything." The man smiled as if she'd said something amusing. "The mind may forget, but the hands remember. Music isn't stored just in our brains, but in our bodies, in the way our fingers naturally find their positions, in the muscle memory built through hours of practice." Something in his words stirred a distant memory. Hadn't her childhood teacher said something similar? That true musicians played not from their minds but from their hearts, their hands merely the bridge between feeling and sound. "Amelia!" Mr. Bellini's voice cut through her thoughts. He was waving her over to the host stand, where he stood with a well-dressed man from the business group. "I'll be right back," she told the elderly gentleman, who nodded and returned to his dessert. At the host stand, Mr. Bellini placed a hand on her shoulder. "Amelia, this is Mr. Chen, the organizer of the business convention. I was just explaining our unfortunate situation with the pianist." Mr. Chen, a trim man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, extended his hand. "Mr. Bellini tells me you might be able to help us out. We have several music enthusiasts in our group who were looking forward to the live piano." Amelia shook his hand automatically, her mouth suddenly dry. "I haven't played in many years," she warned. "I'm really not sure I remember how." "Any music would be appreciated," Mr. Chen assured her. "We're just looking for some ambiance while we finish our dinner. Nothing formal or complex." Mr. Bellini squeezed her shoulder gently. "Just a song or two, Amelia. Tina can cover your tables." Amelia glanced back at the dining room. Several people from the business group were looking their way curiously. The elderly man with the book had also looked up, watching the exchange with interest. "I don't know," she began. "Please," Mr. Chen said softly. "One of our members, Dr. Lee, is retiring after 40 years teaching music at the conservatory. This dinner is partly in his honor. We had hoped to surprise him with some live music." Amelia followed his gesture to an older Asian man at the business table, who was deep in conversation with a colleague. There was something about his animated hands, the passionate way he was speaking. He reminded her of her childhood piano teacher. "Just a few minutes," Mr. Bellini pressed. "You'd be doing me a huge favor." Amelia took a deep breath. Why was this so hard? It was just a piano, just a few simple songs. People played at restaurants all the time. Background music that most diners barely noticed. Why did her heart race at the very thought? Because it wasn't just a piano. It was the instrument that had once been the center of her world, before everything fell apart. It was the dream she'd abandoned, the path not taken. "Okay," she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Just one or two songs," Mr. Bellini beamed. "Wonderful. I'll make an announcement." "No," Amelia said quickly. "No announcement, please. I'll just go over and play quietly. No introduction." Mr. Bellini nodded, clearly willing to accommodate any request as long as she played. "Whatever you prefer." "Thank you, Amelia." As Mr. Chen returned to his table, Amelia stood frozen, wondering what she had just agreed to. Her palms were already sweating, and her heartbeat echoed in her ears like a metronome counting down. Tina appeared at her side, untying Amelia's server apron. "I've got your tables. Go on." "I can't believe I'm doing this," Amelia whispered. Tina gave her a gentle push toward the piano. Sometimes we need to face the things that scare us most. Easy for Tina to say. She hadn't spent 15 years running from this particular fear. As Amelia approached the piano, conversation seemed to dim around her, though she knew it was just her heightened awareness making it seem that way. Most diners were focused on their meals, their companions, their own conversations. No one was paying attention to the waitress moving toward the piano. No one except the elderly man with the book, who watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and the table of business people, a few of whom had noticed her approach. The piano bench felt foreign beneath her as she sat down. The polished keys stretched before her like a road she had once known, but had long forgotten how to travel. Amelia placed her hands in her lap, suddenly unsure. What should she play? The simple practice pieces from her childhood lessons? Chopsticks? Heart and soul? Her fingers trembled slightly as she raised them to the keys. The ivory was cool beneath her fingertips, smooth and familiar despite the years. She pressed one key, a middle C, and its clear tone rang out, cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise. A few heads turned at the sound, but most people continued their meals undisturbed. Amelia took a deep breath. Just one song. A simple melody. Nothing ambitious. She began with "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the first piece most piano students learn. Her fingers moved stiffly at first, like rusty machinery being forced into motion after years of disuse. The notes came out hesitant and uneven, but as she continued, something strange happened. Her hands began to remember. They found their positions naturally, falling into the familiar patterns that had once been as automatic as breathing. The simple children's song transformed beneath her fingers, becoming fuller, more complex. Without conscious thought, Amelia found herself adding a left-hand accompaniment, then harmonies, turning the nursery rhyme into something more sophisticated. When she finished, she was surprised to hear a smattering of applause. Looking up, she saw that several diners were watching her, including the business group. The man Mr. Chen had identified as Dr. Lee was smiling broadly, nodding in encouragement. But it was the elderly man near the piano who captured her attention. He had set down his book and was watching her with an intensity that made her both nervous and curious. There was something in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or was it expectation? "Another," someone called from across the room. Amelia hesitated, then placed her hands on the keys again. What should she play next? A half-remembered Mozart piece from her lessons? A simple folk song? But her fingers seemed to have ideas of their own. Before she could decide consciously, they began moving across the keys, finding a melody she hadn't thought about in years. It was a piece her teacher had given her just before that final recital. A gentle Chopin nocturne that had once been her favorite. The first few measures were tentative, her muscle memory fighting against 15 years of neglect. But then, like a door slowly opening to reveal a forgotten room, the music began to flow more naturally. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The subtle dynamics, the delicate phrasing, the way the melody should breathe like a living thing. She was so absorbed in the rediscovery that she didn't notice the elderly man rise from his table, book in hand, and move closer to the piano. She didn't see the look of astonishment that crossed his face, or the way his eyes filled with unexpected tears. It wasn't until she reached the end of the nocturne, the final notes hanging in the air like a question, that she became aware of the complete silence that had fallen over the restaurant. Every conversation had stopped. Every diner was watching her, and the elderly man was standing beside the piano staring at her with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "It can't be," he whispered, his voice carrying in the silence. After all these years, Amelia's hands froze on the keys. The elderly man was staring at her as if he'd seen a ghost, his book clutched tightly against his chest. The restaurant remained eerily quiet, the usual clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation suspended in the wake of her playing. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I haven't played in a long time." The elderly man shook his head slowly. No, don't apologize." His voice trembled slightly. "That Chopin nocturne, the way you played it, I've only heard one other person interpret it that way." Amelia's chest tightened. She hadn't meant to play Chopin. Her fingers had simply found their way there, as if the music had been waiting inside her all these years, patient and persistent. A smattering of applause broke the tension, starting at the business group's table and spreading throughout the restaurant. Dr. Lee, the retiring music professor, was on his feet, his face bright with appreciation. "Magnificent," he called. "Absolutely magnificent." Mr. Bellini appeared at Amelia's side, beaming like a proud father. "I had no idea you could play like that," he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Before she could answer, the elderly man spoke again, this time more urgently. "Young lady, may I ask who taught you to play?" Amelia swallowed hard. "Professor Douglas Williams at the Central Music Academy." "But that was a long time ago." The elderly man's face paled. He pulled out a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down heavily. "Douglas Williams," he repeated, as if confirming something to himself. "And when did you study with him?" "From when I was 7 until I was 13, Amelia answered, confused by his reaction. "Do you know him?" A sad smile crossed the man's face. "I am Douglas Williams." The world seemed to tilt beneath Amelia. She gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself, staring at the man before her. Now that he'd said it, the recognition clicked into place. The same gentle eyes, though more lined with age. The same careful posture, the same attentive tilt of the head when listening. But he looked so much older than she remembered, his hair now completely white, his shoulders slightly stooped. "Professor Williams?" she whispered. "I didn't recognize you." "It's been 15 years, he said gently. "We both have changed." The diners had returned to their conversations, though many still glanced curiously at the piano corner. Only the business group seemed to be paying close attention, particularly Dr. Lee, who was watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "You disappeared," Professor Williams continued quietly. "After that spring recital, you never came back. Your parents said you refused to play again. I tried to reach out, but—" He trailed off, years of unspoken regret hanging between them. Amelia's mouth went dry. That recital. The memory she'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back. The crowded auditorium, the spotlights, the prestigious judges from the conservatory. She'd been playing Chopin's Ballad No. 1, a piece well beyond her years, but one Professor Williams had insisted she could master. And she had mastered it in the safety of the practice room. "But on stage, I failed," she said simply. "I choked. Halfway through, I just fell apart." Professor Williams leaned forward. "You were 13, Amelia, performing one of the most challenging pieces in the repertoire in front of the conservatory admissions board. What happened was not failure. It was simply part of the journey." A familiar voice interrupted them. "Excuse me." It was Mr. Chen from the business group with Dr. Lee beside him. "I hope we're not intruding, but Dr. Lee wanted to meet the pianist." Amelia felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not really a pianist. I'm just a waitress." Dr. Lee, a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and silver-streaked black hair, shook his head firmly. No one who plays Chopin like that is just anything. Your interpretation was remarkable. Emotional yet controlled. Technically solid yet deeply personal. Dr. Lee taught piano at the conservatory for 40 years, Mr. Chen explained. He's something of an expert. Professor Williams stood, extending his hand to Dr. Lee. Douglas Williams. I used to teach at Central Music Academy. Ah. Dr. Lee's face lit up with recognition. Williams? I've heard your name many times. You sent several exceptional students to the conservatory over the years. And Amelia here was one of my most promising. Professor Williams replied, glancing at her with unmistakable pride. Though we lost touch before she could apply, the implied question hung in the air between them. Why had she given up? What had happened to the promising young pianist she had once been? Amelia felt a light touch on her shoulder. It was Tina holding out her server's apron. Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Bellini says to take all the time you need. I've got your tables covered. Thank you, Amelia managed, though her mind was reeling. How had a routine Tuesday shift turned into this surreal reunion? She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, her past and present colliding in ways she'd never imagined possible. Would you play something else for us? Dr. Lee asked, gesturing to the piano. Perhaps the ballade, if you know it. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. The ballade? The very piece she'd crashed and burned on 15 years ago. I don't think I remember it, she said quickly. Professor Williams studied her face. I think you do, he said quietly. I think you've remembered every note all these years, even if you haven't touched a keyboard. Please, added Mr. Chen. Just one more piece before dessert is served. The entire group is enchanted. Amelia looked down at the keyboard, its black and white keys both inviting and intimidating. Could she really do this? Face the very piece that had sent her running from music all those years ago? You don't have to, Professor Williams said gently, reading her hesitation. But sometimes, Amelia, the only way past our fears is through them. She thought about the girl she'd been at 13, passionate, ambitious, driven. She'd practiced 6 hours a day, dreaming of concert halls and standing ovations. One bad recital had shattered those dreams, or at least that's what she'd told herself. But now, sitting at this piano with her old teacher beside her, she wondered if perhaps she'd been the one doing the shattering. Okay, she said, surprising herself. I'll try. As Mr. Chen and Dr. Lee returned to their table, Professor Williams leaned closer. Remember what I always told you about the ballade? Amelia nodded, the advice coming back as if she'd heard it yesterday. It tells a story. I need to tell the story, not just play the notes. Exactly. He smiled. And now you have 15 more years of life to bring to that story. Amelia took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 were gentle, almost questioning, like the beginning of a fairy tale. Once upon a time, the melody seemed to say. Her fingers were stiff at first, finding their way through the familiar landscape of the piece. But as the introduction gave way to the main theme, something shifted inside her. The music began to flow more naturally, her hands remembering what her mind had tried to forget. It wasn't perfect. She fumbled some of the runs, simplified a few of the more complex passages. But there was something in her playing that hadn't been there at 13, a depth of feeling, an understanding of the emotional narrative behind the notes. The restaurant fell silent again, but Amelia barely noticed. She was lost in the music, in the story it told of hope and longing, of darkness and light. The piece built toward its famously difficult coda, a whirlwind of notes that had tripped her up in that fateful recital. For a moment, her hands hesitated, the memory of that public failure flashing before her. But then she saw Professor Williams watching her, his face full of the same encouragement he'd shown when she was a child. And somehow her fingers found their way, dancing across the keys with a confidence she'd forgotten she possessed. The final chords resonated through the restaurant, powerful and definitive. Amelia sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys, hardly believing what had just happened. She had done it. After 15 years of silence, she had played the ballade from beginning to end. The applause that followed was immediate and thunderous. The business group was on their feet, Dr. Lee leading the standing ovation. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness the performance, Hector the chef wiping his hands on his apron as he clapped enthusiastically. Brava, Dr. Lee called. Brava. Tina was at the back of the restaurant, a tray of desserts temporarily forgotten in her hands, her mouth open in astonishment. But it was Professor Williams's reaction that Amelia sought. He was sitting perfectly still, tears streaming unashamedly down his lined face. "You see," he said softly when their eyes met. "It was always there, waiting for you to return." Amelia's own eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry I ran away," she whispered. Professor Williams shook his head. "Don't be sorry. Be here now. That's all that matters." Mr. Bellini approached, his face flushed with excitement. "Amelia, that was incredible. I had no idea we had a concert pianist serving pasta primavera." "I'm not a concert pianist," she corrected him automatically. "But you could be," Professor Williams interjected. "It's not too late, Amelia." Before she could respond, Dr. Lee joined them, his eyes bright with professional interest. "Young lady, that was a remarkable performance, especially for someone who hasn't played in 15 years. Your technique needs refinement, of course, but your musicality, your emotional connection to the piece, these are things that cannot be taught." Amelia didn't know what to say. An hour ago, she had been a waitress with a nursing degree in progress, her childhood musical ambitions long buried. And now? Now Professor Williams was looking at her as if she'd returned from the dead, and a conservatory professor was complimenting her playing. "Thank you," she managed, "but this was just a one-time thing. I haven't touched a piano in 15 years, and I have my nursing classes, and you can decide what this means tomorrow," Professor Williams said gently. "Tonight, just be with the music." Something in his words resonated with Amelia. Be with the music. Wasn't that what she'd always loved most? Not the applause or the achievements, but the pure joy of sitting at a piano and bringing a piece to life. "Would you play something else?" asked a voice from a nearby table. Other diners nodded in agreement. Amelia looked at Professor Williams, who smiled encouragingly. "The night is young," he said, "and you have 15 years of silence to make up for." She turned back to the piano, a strange lightness filling her chest. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment before finding the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, another piece from her. Past that seemed to have been waiting patiently for her return. As the dreamy, impressionistic notes floated through the restaurant, Amelia felt something unlock inside her, a door she had closed long ago creaking open once more. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what choices she would make about music and nursing and the path forward. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, she was whole again. The final notes of Clair de Lune hung in the air like a gentle mist. For several heartbeats, no one in the restaurant moved or spoke, as if afraid to break the spell Amelia had cast. Then, like a wave, applause washed through the dining room again. Even more enthusiastic than before, Amelia opened her eyes, somewhat startled to find herself at the piano in Bellini's rather than in the practice rooms of her childhood. Her fingers still rested lightly on the keys, reluctant to let go of the connection they had re-established after so many years. "That was exquisite," Professor Williams said softly, his eyes glistening. "You play with even more feeling now than you did as a child." Before Amelia could respond, Mr. Bellini hurried over, beaming. "Amelia, the customers are asking if you take requests. And Mr. Chen wants to know if you'd be willing to perform again tomorrow night for another business dinner." I don't know," she stammered, overwhelmed by how quickly everything was changing. "I have classes tomorrow, and I'm scheduled for the dinner shift. We can work around your schedule," Mr. Bellini assured her quickly. "Maybe just an hour of playing? I'd pay you extra, of course." The thought of being paid to play the piano struck Amelia as surreal. Since that disastrous recital at 13, she'd redirected all her focus and ambition toward practical goals: finishing high school, working to save money, pursuing a stable career in nursing. Music had been relegated to the past, a childhood dream best forgotten. And yet here she was being asked to play professionally. Dr. Lee approached from the business table, his expression thoughtful. "Ms. Amelia, might I have a word with you and Professor Williams?" She nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from Mr. Bellini's eager planning. As the restaurant owner returned to his duties, Dr. Lee pulled up a chair beside the piano. "I hope you don't mind my saying this," Dr. Lee began, "but talents like yours are exceptionally rare. Even with 15 years away from the instrument, your musicality shines through. The technical elements can be regained with practice, but what you possess, the ability to communicate emotion through music that cannot be taught. Professor Williams nodded in agreement. I've been saying the same thing since she was 7 years old. Amelia has a gift, she corrected softly. I had a gift. And then I ruined it. Dr. Lee tilted his head curiously. How does one ruin a gift? Amelia looked down at her hands, at the calluses on her fingertips from years of carrying trays rather than playing scales. I failed when it mattered most. The spring showcase recital 15 years ago. I was supposed to play the ballade for the conservatory admissions board. You were probably there. Dr. Lee's eyes widened with sudden recognition. Wait, you were that young girl? The one who stopped halfway through? Amelia's chest tightened. So he did remember. Her humiliation had been notable enough to stick in his memory after all these years. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely audible. That was me. To her surprise, Dr. Lee leaned forward with interest rather than judgment. I do remember. You were extraordinarily young to be attempting such a difficult piece, and now that I think about it, you played beautifully up until that moment. But I froze, Amelia said. I just stopped in front of everyone. The judges, the audience, my parents. Professor Williams placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Amelia, what happened that day was not the catastrophe you've made it out to be all these years. Stage fright happens to even the most accomplished musicians. It wasn't a reflection of your ability or your potential. But I never went back, she said. I was too ashamed. I packed up my music books, told my parents I was done, and never touched a piano again. Until tonight, Dr. Lee studied her face. And yet, when you finally returned to the keys tonight, you chose the very piece that once defeated you. And this time you played it all the way through. Amelia hadn't thought of it that way. Why had her fingers found their way to the ballade? Perhaps some part of her had been waiting all these years for a chance at redemption. What happened after that recital? Dr. Lee asked. Besides giving up the piano? Amelia shrugged. Life went on. I finished school, worked various jobs, started taking classes toward a nursing degree. Nursing? Dr. Lee raised an eyebrow. An admirable profession, to be sure. May I ask what drew you to it? Amelia thought about her grandmother's fall, about the gentle hands of the nurses who had cared for her, about the quiet satisfaction of helping someone heal. I wanted to do something meaningful, she said finally. Something that helped people. Music helps people too, Professor Williams pointed out gently. In ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically. He tapped the book he'd been reading earlier. The Therapeutic Value of Music in Healthcare Settings. That's actually my current research focus, Dr. Lee said, leaning forward with increased interest. The intersection of music and healing. The conservatory has recently established a joint program with the University Medical School, exploring music therapy applications for everything from stroke recovery to anxiety disorders. Amelia looked up, genuinely curious despite herself. Really? We had a lecture about alternative therapy approaches in my nursing program, and music therapy was mentioned but only briefly. It's a rapidly expanding field, Dr. Lee confirmed, and one that desperately needs people who understand both music and healthcare. People who can speak both languages, so to speak. Professor Williams was watching Amelia closely, noting the spark of interest in her eyes. It sounds like something that might combine both your world, and he suggested carefully. Amelia felt a strange flutter in her chest, not quite hope, but perhaps the precursor to it. Could there really be a way to bring together the two halves of her life? The music she had abandoned and the healing path she had chosen? I don't know, she said slowly. I'm already halfway through my nursing program. The conservatory offers scholarships for the music therapy program, Dr. Lee said, including for non-traditional students, people returning to music after pursuing other paths. Amelia shook her head, overwhelmed. This is happening so fast. 2 hours ago, I was just a waitress with nursing school debt. And now you're talking about conservatories and scholarships and reclaiming the gift you've kept buried for 15 years, Professor Williams finished for her. At that moment, Tina approached with a slightly apologetic expression. Sorry to interrupt, but your tables are asking for their checks, Amelia. And Hector says he's boxing up some tiramisu for the professor here on the house. Reality came rushing back. She was still at work. She still had responsibilities, bills to pay, classes to attend tomorrow. I need to finish my shift, Amelia said, standing up from the piano bench. Dr. Lee stood as well, reaching into his pocket for a business card. Take this. The fall semester applications aren't due for another month. Think about what I've said. Amelia accepted the card hesitantly, as if it might burn her fingers. Thank you, but I'm not sure. Just think about it, Dr. Lee insisted gently. No pressure, no expectations, just possibilities. As Amelia returned to her duties, retrieving her server's apron from Tina and preparing the checks for her tables, her mind was spinning. Customers kept stopping her, complimenting her playing, asking if she performed regularly somewhere. Mr. Bellini was already telling other diners that they'd have live piano music again tomorrow night. It all felt like a dream, or perhaps more accurately, like waking from a very long sleep. After closing out her tables, Amelia found Professor Williams still sitting near the piano, nursing a cup of coffee, his dessert finished. You don't have to make any decisions tonight, he said as she approached. But I hope you'll consider picking up lessons again, regardless of what else you decide to do. Amelia sat down across from him. Why did you never reach out after I quit? All these years, and we run into each other by chance in a restaurant? Professor Williams sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. I did try, Amelia. I called your parents several times. They said you refused to discuss piano with anyone. After a few months, I respected your decision and stopped calling. Perhaps that was a mistake on my part. Amelia remembered her parents' gentle attempts to coax her back to music, the piano, books they'd leave casually around the house, the concert tickets that mysteriously appeared. She had rebuffed all their efforts, stubborn in her conviction that her musical journey was over. It wasn't your fault, she said. I was. Hiding, I guess. From the failure, from the disappointment, from the fear, Professor Williams suggested softly. Fear is the great silencer of talent, Amelia. More careers have been ended by fear than by any lack of ability. She thought about the feeling that had gripped her on that recital stage, the sudden, overwhelming certainty that she wasn't good enough, would never be good enough. How that feeling had crystallized into a decision that shaped the next 15 years of her life. I don't know if I can go back, she admitted. I don't know if I'm brave enough. Professor Williams smiled. You already went back tonight. Playing the ballad in front of a restaurant full of strangers. That took courage. That was different. No one was expecting anything. It wasn't a formal performance. And yet, you moved everyone who heard you. Did you see Dr. Lee's face during Clair de Lune? The man has heard some of the greatest pianists in the world, and still, you brought him to tears. Amelia glanced across the now empty restaurant to where the business group had been sitting. They had left generous tips and heartfelt thanks, with several members pressing business cards into her hand, urging her to contact them about potential performance opportunities. What if it was just a fluke, she asked. What if I try again and the fear comes back? Professor Williams leaned forward. Then you'll face it, note by note, measure by measure. But Amelia, what if it wasn't a fluke? What if tonight was just the beginning of what could be? His words hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Amelia looked down at her hands, the hands that had surprised her tonight with their resilience, their memory, their capacity for beauty despite years of neglect. I have a small upright piano at my apartment, Professor Williams said. It's old, but well maintained. I'd be happy to offer you practice time, no pressure, no expectations. Just you and the music finding your way back to each other. Amelia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? After I disappeared for 15 years? Professor Williams's eyes crinkled with warmth. Because great talents are rare, Amelia. And because second chances are even rarer. When they appear, we must honor them. He glanced at his watch and stood slowly. It's getting late, and you've had quite an evening. Think about what I've said. What, Doctor? Lee offered. The world of music has changed in 15 years. There are paths available now that didn't exist then. Intersections between art and science, between music and healing. Amelia rose as well, suddenly reluctant to see him go. What If this magical evening ended and tomorrow everything went back to normal? What if her brief reunion with music faded like a dream in the morning light? As if reading her thoughts, Professor Williams reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn key for my apartment. The piano is in the front room. Use it any time, whether I'm there or not. Music is patient, Amelia. It's waited 15 years for you. It can wait while you decide what comes next. Amelia looked at the key, then back at her, former teacher's face lined with age but still alight with the same passion for music she remembered from her childhood. "Thank you," she said simply, accepting the key, and with it, the possibility of a different future than the one she'd resigned herself to. As Professor Williams gathered his coat and book, Amelia felt as if she were standing at a crossroads. One path leading back to the life she'd been building, the other winding toward a destination she'd once abandoned. Perhaps, she thought, there was a third path, one that hadn't been visible until tonight, one that might allow her to bring together the fractured pieces of her past and present into something new and whole. 6 months later, Amelia carefully arranged sheet music on the piano at Bellini's, preparing for her Friday night performance. The restaurant had undergone subtle changes since that fateful Tuesday evening when she'd first returned to the Keys. The piano had been moved to a more prominent position, and a small area had been cleared for what Mr. Bellini proudly called the performance space. A discreet sign near the entrance now advertised live piano music Friday through Sunday with Amelia's name underneath. "Need anything before the dinner rush starts?" Tina asked, setting a glass of water on the piano's edge, careful to use the coaster Amelia had brought specifically for this purpose. "I'm all set, thanks," Amelia replied, smiling at her former co-worker. Though she still wore the restaurant's uniform, she was no longer juggling serving trays and taking orders. Her role had transformed. She was now Bellini's resident pianist. On weekend evenings, and the change still felt surreal some days, the last 6 months had unfolded like a piece of music, with unexpected harmonies and surprising modulations. The morning after her impromptu performance, Amelia had woken with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She'd kept the key Professor Williams had given her, turning it over in her palm as she made her morning coffee, feeling its weight. Not just the physical weight of metal, but the heavier weight of possibility it represented. Instead of going directly to her nursing class, she had taken a detour to Professor Williams' apartment. She'd expected to feel awkward or intrusive using his key, but he had answered the door himself, dressed for the day, and seemingly unsurprised by her early visit. "I thought you might come," he'd said simply, leading her to the old upright piano in his living room. That first morning she had played for 2 hours straight, working through pieces half remembered, making mistakes, starting over, finding her way back. Professor Williams had moved quietly around his apartment making tea, reading, occasionally offering a gentle suggestion when she struggled with a particular passage. She hadn't given up her nursing classes. That had been her first firm decision. Whatever path opened up with music, she would complete what she had started. But she had visited Professor Williams' apartment every day she could, sometimes for only 20 minutes between classes and work, sometimes for hours on her days off. 3 weeks after that first night at Bellini's, she had called the number on Dr. Lee's card. Their conversation had been long and detailed, exploring options she hadn't known existed. Music therapy programs, scholarships for returning students, the intersection of healthcare and music that seemed almost too perfect, as if designed specifically for someone with her unusual combination of interests and experiences. Now, 6 months later, Amelia was nearing the completion of her nursing degree while also enrolled in preliminary courses for the music therapy program at the conservatory. Her schedule was demanding, but she had never felt more alive, more purposeful. "They're coming," Tina whispered, breaking into Amelia's thoughts. Amelia looked up to see Mr. Bellini escorting Professor Williams and Dr. Lee to a table near the piano. This had become something of a Friday tradition, the two music educators coming to dinner, listening to her play, then spending time afterward discussing her progress and possibilities for the future. But tonight was different. Tonight, there were others with them, a woman in a wheelchair, perhaps in her 40s, accompanied by a caregiver, and an older man who walked with a slight limp supported by a cane. Amelia recognized them from her volunteer work at the rehabilitation center, where she now spent Tuesday afternoons as part of her music therapy training. The woman, Cynthia, had suffered a stroke 6 months earlier that had left her unable to speak. The man, George, was recovering from a serious car accident that had damaged the left side of his body. For the past 8 weeks, Amelia had been working with them in small group sessions, using music as a bridge to help rebuild neural pathways damaged by their respective traumas. The work was challenging, sometimes frustrating, but also deeply rewarding in ways she had never anticipated. "They came to hear you play," Professor Williams explained as he approached the piano. "I hope that's okay. They've been telling me how much your sessions mean to them." Amelia felt a flutter of nervousness. It was one thing to play for restaurant patrons who were focused primarily on their meals and conversation. It was another to perform for people who had come specifically to hear her. "Of course it's okay," she said, though her heart raced a little faster. As Mr. Bellini settled the group at their table, Amelia adjusted the bench and took a deep breath. Her repertoire had expanded significantly over the past months, with Professor Williams's guidance and her own dedicated practice. She no longer needed to rely solely on pieces remembered from childhood. She began with a Schubert impromptu, its gentle melody filling the restaurant as the first dinner guests arrived. From her position, she could see Cynthia's face, how her eyes closed as she listened, her damaged hand moving slightly in her lap as if following the rhythm. Between pieces, Amelia sipped her water and acknowledged the scattered applause with a nod. This was not a formal recital. People were here to dine, to converse, to enjoy an evening out. The music was meant to enhance their experience, not demand their attention. Yet she noticed how conversations often quieted when she began a new piece, how some diners would pause mid-bite, fork suspended, to listen. During her break, Amelia joined Professor Williams's table. Cynthia immediately reached for her hand, squeezing it with her good right hand. Though she couldn't speak, her eyes conveyed what words could not. "Your playing is even better than in our sessions," George said, his speech slightly slurred but his meaning clear. "It's different here somehow, more free." Amelia understood what he meant. In the rehabilitation center, her playing was purposeful, structured around therapeutic goals, encouraging movement, stimulating memory, rebuilding coordination. Here at Bellini's, she could simply play, following where the music led. "Cynthia wanted to show you something," the caregiver said, opening a folder on the table. Inside were sheets of paper with musical notations, simple but clear, written in a slightly shaky hand. "She's been working on this between your sessions," the caregiver explained. "She wants you to play it." Amelia examined the handwritten score with growing amazement. Though basic, it was unmistakably an original composition, a short melodic piece that somehow conveyed both sadness and hope. Cynthia, unable to speak words, had found a way to speak through music. "This is beautiful," Amelia said, genuinely moved. "Did you write this yourself?" Cynthia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Would you play it?" George asked. "For all of us to hear?" Amelia looked to Professor Williams and Dr. Lee, who both nodded encouragement. "I'd be honored," she said, taking the pages back to the piano. As she played Cynthia's composition for the first time, Amelia was struck by how the simple melody carried such emotional weight. The restaurant seemed to quiet around them, as if the diners sensed they were witnessing something special. Not virtuosic playing or complex harmonies, but the pure expression of a human spirit finding its voice through music. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Cynthia's face shone with joy, and even George's usually stoic expression had softened with emotion. Later that night, after the dinner crowd had thinned and Professor Williams and the others had departed, Mr. Bellini approached the piano with an envelope in hand. "A letter came for you today," he said, handing it to her. "From the conservatory." Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. She had applied for a special scholarship program in music therapy, one designed for students with healthcare backgrounds. The competition had been fierce, with applicants from across the country. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then widened. "I got it," she whispered. "Full tuition for the graduate program in music therapy." Mr. Bellini's face split into a wide grin. "I never doubted it for a moment," he said proudly. Not since that first night when you sat down at this piano and showed us all what was hiding inside you. Amelia ran her fingers lightly over the keys, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. From a terrified 13-year-old fleeing from failure to a grown woman, stepping confidently toward a future that combined both her worlds. "Will you still play here on weekends?" Mr. Bellini asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "The customers would revolt if you left us completely." Amelia laughed. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," she assured him. "This is where it all started again. This piano, this place." She gestured around the restaurant that had become so much more than just a workplace. As Mr. Bellini returned to closing duties, Amelia remained at the piano, playing softly for herself now, a gentle Chopin nocturne that flowed from her fingers without conscious thought. She thought about Professor Williams finding her here by chance, about Dr. Lee offering a bridge between her two worlds, about Cynthia finding her voice through music when words had been stolen from her. Sometimes life's most significant turning points came disguised as ordinary moments. A busy Tuesday shift, a pianist calling in sick, a restaurant owner making a desperate request. 6 months ago, she had been a waitress compelled to play piano by circumstance and obligation. Now she played by choice, by passion, by the deep conviction that music was not merely something she did but an essential part of who she was. The final notes of the nocturne lingered in the quiet restaurant. Tomorrow would bring classes and study, practice sessions and therapeutic techniques to master. The path ahead would not be easy, balancing her nursing knowledge with her rediscovered musical gifts, building a career in a field still finding its place in the healthcare system. But tonight, in the peaceful aftermath of music shared and connections made, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her way home, not to the abandoned dreams of her childhood, but to something richer, deeper, and ultimately more meaningful than she could have imagined. She closed the piano gently, gathering her music and her thoughts. As she walked through the restaurant toward the exit, she passed the spot where she had stood 6 months earlier, balancing plates and taking orders, unaware that her life was about to change. Sometimes the most amazing journeys began with a single, reluctant step toward the very thing that frightened you most. Sometimes the greatest gifts came from facing old fears and finding that, with time and perspective, they had transformed into new possibilities. And sometimes, just sometimes, a waitress compelled to play piano could rediscover not just music, but herself in the process.